Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Aubrey Reeves, President and CEO of Business and Arts. Before we begin, I'd first like to take a moment to acknowledge that I'm a settler speaking to you from Toronto. While the Business and Arts team is located across the country in many different territories, I have the honor to be a guest on the traditional lands and waters of the Petun and Wendat peoples, the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee confederacies, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River, as well as many other Indigenous nations, some of whose names are no longer remembered. We acknowledge all who came before us and have traveled the lands and waters of this territory. We're grateful to work, to live, and to meet on these lands. A big thank you to the Speaker Series presenting partner, Power Corporation of Canada, whose support enable us to bring these kinds of timely discussions to you. We're grateful for Power Corporation's continued support. Thank you also to supporting partner, Arts Consulting Group. On to a few housekeeping items. We're happy to have ASL interpretation for today's session. Auto-generated English and French captions can also be turned on. Only the presenters will have our microphones on today, so please submit your questions in the Q&A box. The session is scheduled for 1 hour. And today's session is an effort to equip the arts sector with the information you need to know about the rapidly changing federal landscape. I'm excited to welcome the folks from PAA Advisors to bring us up to speed and to provide some insights on what to expect in the near future. So let me introduce our panelists, Sean Casey, Andrew Walker, and Sonja Tilroe. Sean is the Managing Director at PAA in Ottawa, where he leads the firm's Arts and Culture Practice Group. Over the past 15 years, Sean has established his practice group as the industry leader in assisting Canada's cultural industries to advance their public policy agendas on regulatory, policy, and funding issues. This has included providing government relations advice and assistance to clients in the film, television, music, publishing, performing arts, and the not-for-profit sectors. Prior to entering advisory business, Sean worked in federal and municipal politics, where he established a reputation of effectiveness working with 3 members of parliament, the opposition House Leader, and the Office of the Leader of the Opposition. Andrew is Director, Arts, Culture, and Procurement at PAA and has extensive experience in both federal and provincial politics and advocacy. Andrew has previously worked for members of parliament in both government and opposition, including the former parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. Andrew is also a professional musician, and he's sung for over 15 years with Grammy and Juno nominated groups around Canada and abroad. And Sonja is an advisor with PAA's Arts and Culture Group, also based in Ottawa. She's originally from Alberta and is committed to providing public policy monitoring, analysis, and research on the PAA team. Her passion for the arts and culture is deeply rooted in her background, also as a musician, where she mastered both the cello and clarinet. So welcome to the 3 of you, and I'll hand it over.
Thank you so much, Aubrey. Pleasure to be here. We're going to be sharing a presentation over the course of the next 40 minutes or so. Again, as Aubrey mentioned, feel free to put the questions in the chat box. I am Sean Casey, as Aubrey mentioned. I'm Managing Director here at PAA Advisory Conseils, calling in as my colleagues Andrew and Sonja are from the unceded traditional territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people here in the Greater Ottawa region. I think Aubrey did an outstanding job summarizing who we are and what we do. And again, always a pleasure to be here on Business for the Arts, opportunities to engage with so many in the sector. Especially since the last time we did this was probably in the middle of the pandemic, when we were on a monthly basis to try to connect to talk about the changing landscape related to a pandemic disease. Now we're going to talk about a changing landscape related to electoral change. Maybe if we can go to the next slide here. So let's talk about what has happened in terms of what has caused the change and where are we headed. A couple of big seismic events happened early in 2025. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau stepping down, and then the inauguration day a few weeks later of Donald Trump, where he started his talk about annexing Canada as a 51st state and using economic force to do that. So we have seen in very, very short order over the course of the last 3 months, a new Liberal leader and team elected just over a week ago. a federal election, and although it can go up until October 2025, we'll outline why it's going to happen much, much sooner, in days, if not hours ahead of time. And then, of course, a new government expected probably at some point after an election in May. So what were some of the big events that have occurred? Well, first and foremost, the stepping down of Prime Minister Trudeau necessitated a Liberal leadership race, and we have a new Liberal leader and Prime Minister, no longer Prime Minister designate. He is Prime Minister, Mark Carney, who swept to a landslide victory in terms of the leadership race, besting Chrystia Freeland, Karina Gould, and Frank Baylis by quite a bit. And he, of course, got straight to work in going on to international locales and starting to engage with world leaders to try to set his mark as Canada's 24th Prime Minister. If we go to the next slide, again, what has changed? If I had done this presentation back in January, you would have seen something very, very different in the world. January, just ahead of the Prime Minister stepping down, the Liberal Party wasn't in a race for the top spot. They were in a race to actually stay out of the bottom spot. They were having historical lows in terms of where they were headed going into the next election. But the series of events, Justin Trudeau stepping down, Donald Trump coming into power, I will even throw in there a big hockey victory of Canada over the United States at the Four Nations, has really bumped up Canadian patriotism. And as a result, I think you've seen an accompanying rise in Liberal support much quicker than we would usually see in an off-writ period. Using Angus Reid as an example, they just put out a poll, one of the bigger polls that we've seen in the last polling cycle, with over 4,000 respondents. And again, we are seeing for the first time in many cases, 2.5 years, the Liberals overtaking the Conservatives in terms of popular support. This is not just one pollster. This is all 8 of the major pollsters across the country that do regular polling are all showing the same trend of a Liberal resurgence, a Conservative decline, and a borderline cratering of Bloc and NDP support. Going to the ballot questions in terms of who can best handle various issues that are going to be probably top of mind for people going to the ballot box in the coming weeks. You can see across the board, and again, this is from Angus Reid a little bit under a week ago, that on all the major metrics, whether it be trade wars, expanding relations outside of the United States, Trump's threats, protecting the Canadian economy, relations between Ottawa and the provinces, improving healthcare, and one that probably stings for Conservative supporters, affordability and reducing the cost of living. Mark Carney is leading Pierre Poilievre by considerable margins on all the key ballot box questions. So again, this will be very interesting. An election race, which was borne out over a 5 to 6 week period, takes a long time, and we are on the precipice of that starting. Going back a little bit in time here, as mentioned, back on the 9th of March, Mark Carney won the Liberal leadership, and just a short few days later was installed as Prime Minister, taking over from Prime Minister Trudeau. Has a much smaller, leaner, more compact cabinet, going down to 24 cabinet ministers from Justin Trudeau's 37. So where are we now? We now find ourselves coming into what everyone was expecting on Monday, the return of Parliament. If you remember, when Justin Trudeau stepped down back in early January, he prorogued the House of Commons until the 24th of March. If I'm a betting man, and most days I am, I will say we will probably not see the House return on the 24th of March. In fact, it looks like we will see Prime Minister Carney go down to Rideau Hall, meet with the Governor General, most likely on Sunday, dissolve Parliament for an election. If he does that, we're most likely looking at a Monday, May 5th date in order to fulfill the minimum requirement of a 36-day campaign. If for some reason he goes on Saturday, he does have a little bit more room, which would allow for an earlier election on Monday, the 28th of April, keeping in mind the convention in this country is that elections always take place on Mondays. So where are we at right now? Usually going into an election, everyone knows when it's coming. They've got a long runway. They've got a lot of time to put election platforms. This one is election platforms a little bit on the fly. We have seen the parties engaged in platform building. There was a whole platform building exercise with the Liberals that filtered in with Justin Trudeau as leader. We now have a new leader in Mark Carney, and there is a situation where a lot of that work that has been done is not lost. It just gets transferred to a new leader, and we'll see how he ends up using it. For the Conservatives, the NDP and the Bloc, platform building is a little bit different. They usually work through their lead critics and then filter it into a central party office to determine where they're going to move on various issues. I will note that not all of those issues end up seeing the light of day during a 36-day election campaign. They will pick, they will choose, they will have different days that have certain degrees of impact or influence on the electorate. So not everything gets moved around. And again, I think the wild card in all of this is Prime Minister Donald Trump and the fact that he can seem to change the rules of the game on any given day, at any given hour, at any given time. So I think this election campaign is going to be very fluid. But again, those platforms are not guaranteed to include the sector, but it's important to have those opportunities, whether you get candidates at doors, at all candidates debates. Make sure that arts and culture issues are put to the forefront, because the easiest way for parties to forget about them is to never hear about them in the first place. So ensure that you have those opportunities to engage with all of the parties, whether they be the Liberals, the Conservative, the NDP, the Bloc, the Green. All of them are working hard on moving their platform presentations forward into an election that we should have in a couple of days.
So as we move to the next section, we'll talk a little bit about charting a little bit about what's going to happen next, the scenarios of what could possibly be. Really, we're looking at either the Liberals or Conservatives forming the next government. And if the Liberals win, it really is a sense of continuity with change, whereas the Conservatives intend to bring with them a significant amount of change from what we've seen in the government of Canada for the last 10 years. The Liberals win a majority government. That looks, as of today, the likeliest possibility. I can't believe I'm saying that, but as of 3:15 Eastern time on March 19th, that is the most likely outcome, according to the pollsters right now. The Liberals under Mark Carney will be able to enact their renewed mandate, and quite possibly, though, we will see a minority government yet again, similar to what we've seen over the last three and a half years, with the Liberals aligning with the NDP or possibly the Bloc Québécois. In the case of a Liberal government, we expect a similar agenda, but not exactly the same. This is not a government that is working as it did under Justin Trudeau. We see a focus very much on reducing the size of the cabinet, reducing the number of cabinet committees, really with the sole focus on how do we deal with what's going on to the south of us with our partners in the States. There is certainly an emphasis on the public servants who lead a lot of the work across the government of Canada, both in our purposes within the Canada Council and, as it's currently titled, the Department of Canadian Heritage. But at the end of the day, the government will have to find opportunities to either spend differently or save money, given Mark Carney's initial promises around national security and defense. He has made a commitment to ramp up spending for national defense, which in and of itself will either lead to a larger deficit or savings in different ways. I'll also mention briefly here, he's also talking about a renewed model, similar perhaps to those of you who might be familiar with the city of Toronto, on splitting expenditures for operations from that of capital. I know other governments across the country do that as well. Pierre Poilievre, on the other hand, represents massive change. They absolutely would intend to be focused on the US, but have an intention of disrupting the status quo of the way things work within the government and beyond. There is an intention to move to a one-for-one spending promise, which I know Sean, I believe it is, will speak to later on when it comes to any new spending, but also a reduction in the size of government overall. We can expect there to be cuts or dramatic reallocations one way or another as it relates to defense, security, public safety. And at the end of the day, the Conservatives will want to show that they're able to hit the ground running. What can we just do is a question we hear thrown around in the halls of Ottawa right now. Where can we start and move quickly without the delays caused by necessary legislative processes or pieces related to regulation? All of this is under the guise, though, on the next slide, of tariffs and its impact certainly on the cultural sector. We think about budget 2025. Usually this time of year, from a lobbying perspective, we'd be in the last stretch as the government develops its budget, typically introduced late March, sometime into April each year. We'd see what the government spending priorities were going to be for this upcoming year. But of course, with an election with now 3 finance ministers in the last 6 months, we are in that shifting period where we don't know exactly when budget will be, but we can presumably think about what is the focus of it, and that really does relate down to the tariffs, counter tariffs, and effect on the Canadian economy that is expected to come from what's happening in the States. So the timing to focus the investment will depend on who is elected. If the Liberals are elected, it is almost entirely going to be related to investments through the lens of tariffs, whether that's building resilience against what is happening in the States, supporting those businesses most affected, or as we've seen just recently with Stephen Guilbeault named as Minister of Canadian Identity and Culture, the sense of Canadian unity, Canadian identity, pieces that can bring us together. Whereas with the Conservatives, we are certainly expecting to see a similar approach in the sense of responding to what's happening in the States, but there is a fundamental top-line priority for the Conservatives about reducing the size of government, rapidly implementing efficiencies, and finding ways to encourage investment from the business sector, not just from the public sector, at least in their mind. I will say, as it relates specifically to arts and culture, there are a number of ideas that have been thrown around by different arts and culture groups when it comes to lobbying the federal government over the last number of weeks and months. One of the largest ones, and truly one of the ones that has galvanized support within the current government, is the investment ask for the Canada Council for the Arts, $140 million times 3 years. That has been submitted as a top priority by now former Minister of Canadian Heritage, Pascal Saint-Onge, in the usual development process of a budget. So we know that has been a previously stated high priority issue, as has the CBC Radio-Canada renewal, as has copyright issues, and a number of other areas related to the Department of Canadian Heritage. So as we think about the art of the possible, that certainly that ask, $140 million to the Canada Council, we've seen to have the most movement. But of course, there are a number of other asks that for reasons one way or the other, either themselves are continuing forward or not. When it comes to tariffs and counter tariffs, I know a lot of folks on this call have been doing work already to really understand the effect of what the current tariffs and counter tariffs are on your sector, on your businesses or your practice, and also to understand what might come should there be more tariffs, more counter tariffs, more non-tariff retaliatory measures. And so the minister's offices, and really it's a generic comment, all of the minister's offices are very eager to hear from stakeholders in the cultural sector. So although we'll talk more specifically about the election in just a moment, I very much encourage everyone in this call, if you have anything to share, data, any anecdotes, any examples, anything as it relates to tariffs, if you have seen that it is more expensive to buy lumber to create your set, or to buy textiles as your building costumes, or if you're worried about what's going to happen with immigration, all of these things that we may not know yet, the Government of Canada, ministers' offices, and notably the public servants are, I say this with all the love and respect, desperate for this information. They cannot make decisions without understanding what's going on the ground. So I'm happy to share and happy to follow up after this call with folks who have specific questions. There is an ongoing consultation on the effect of the next round of retaliatory tariffs, the counter tariffs that Canada would levy against the States. There are other mechanisms for folks to participate and share their views. So I really encourage as much as possible folks to participate in the discussion, specifically as it relates to tariffs and counter tariffs, given it'll be at the crux of whoever is forming the next government. I'm not going to walk through every bullet point here, but at the end of the day, I think it's worth talking a little bit about motivation at this stage. The Liberals are very much focusing on a strong negotiating position with Donald Trump. It's interesting. Just yesterday, Trump was out. I think he did an interview with Fox News, and he was talking about how he doesn't want that conservative leader to be elected because he doesn't support him. I'd much rather deal with a Liberal, which has been sort of the issue of the day in the Ottawa bubble. The Liberals are trying to carve out the niche for Mark Carney as the person best positioned to negotiate or to frankly respond to Donald Trump. If after an election, they'll either win or they won't, I suppose. If they don't win, there's a real open conversation to come about restructuring or rebranding with the new Liberal leader, Carney, likely to stay given what's happening right now. But again, it's 3:23 Eastern, we'll see. And or to sort of launch into this crisis mode government. We heard talk of a wartime cabinet sort of mentality, really action-oriented, responding quickly. So that's what we can expect from the Liberals during the election and post-election. Conservatives have a real common idea around real people and common sense. And so there's a focus during the election to speak to the pocketbook issues that make sense to average Canadians in the minds of Conservatives. What makes the most sense is affordability. Do I have more money in my pocket today than I did 10 years ago? Is a house more affordable today than it was 10 years ago? These fundamental issues are very much at the core of what the Conservative message is. They are using phrases like Canada First, but it's Canada First through doing the things they intended to do anyway. Canada First through axing the tax without necessarily building much beyond that. But of course, we're in early days of a not quite election. We will see in the first 100 days, if they do get elected, there is a plan that the Conservatives have been working on for the better part of a year, but what they will implement very quickly. But also, if they don't win, it's an interesting period of time. We haven't seen a Conservative leader get a second crack at winning an election in a while. And so we'll see whether Pierre Poilievre and the tone that he's represented as leader of the party remains the focus if they don't win this upcoming election. The NDP are trying very hard to position themselves as the progressive option against the elites, talking about Mark Carney's relationship with the business sector, but nothing has landed so far. In fact, I saw a poll today that had the NDP winning a single seat of the 343 available. Quite a disaster for any party, including the NDP. So likelihood into the next election, they may end up choosing whoever the next, or being the kingmaker in this case, in all likelihood, supporting a government that is a minority government. But at this stage, it's looking quite likely that we'll see a leadership change and a question about who they are and who they represent. Who are the NDP meant to be speaking to? Again, this is a little bit of prognostication. There's a lot to come, but we'll still see. And the Bloc Québécois, in a similar way, not exactly the same, are talking a lot about cultural sovereignty, talking a lot about representing the Quebec voice within government. And so at the end of the day, it's Quebec first and foremost. That is the focus, as always, for the Bloc, but they also represent a possible dance partner in a minority parliament. Last slide I'll talk about in this stage is the future for the arts sector. If there's a Conservative majority government, the worst case scenario is what you would think. It's quite a large cut to the Department of Canadian Heritage and a Canada Council. Conservatives will use the idea of common sense to say that the business sector and other sectors are better positioned than the government is to invest, and there will not be significant support for some of the other social issues that the Government of Canada has been involved in. If I move, though, to the likeliest scenario, I think we won't see quite that pace of the worst case scenario, but rather a reduction in the size of governments. I used to sit next to a guy just in front of me here that was the chief of staff to Minister James Moore when he was Minister of Canadian Heritage under Stephen Harper. And at that time, the edict was find 5 to 10% a reduction in every department across the Government of Canada. And we're hearing a very similar approach this time. One thing I'll point out is if the Conservatives are elected, they have been extraordinarily clear at all steps along the way. Defund the CBC Radio-Canada is the #1 cultural issue for them. And so we would expect to see a relatively quick move towards that. We'll see if something changes with the Canadian unity conversation ongoing, but it is the wedge issue that the Liberals are using with the Conservatives right now. And their Conservative minority depends on who supports them. At the end of the day, their priorities remain the same, but if it's a Conservative minority supported by the Bloc Québécois has been clear about their support for Radio-Canada, we may see something different. But at the end of the day, I'll remind folks that minority governments don't typically last as long as they have this time. They usually last for a year or two, as it was in 2006, 2008. This last minority parliament has been, or this current, I guess, minority parliament has been one of the longest lasting, if not the longest lasting, Canadian history. And then under the Liberal government, we can see opportunities for a best case scenario, for sure. Robust investment in the arts sector as a means to build Canadian culture, but only through the guise of return on investment. That's certainly a focus for Mark Carney and his government. But at the end of the day, the Liberals have shown themselves over the last 10 years to be focused on short-term investments that focus on economic stability and fiscal responsibility. Maybe that fiscal responsibility, we can quibble, but at the end of the day, that's been the focus. It's a 2-year investment here, a 3-year investment there. We would expect a similar type of approach to react to what's happening live, as opposed to the massive permanent increases that some of the cultural sector have asked for. Can come back to all of this at the Q&A section, but maybe I'll pass it off to my colleague.
Perfect. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks, Sean. So as we've talked about, lots of different priorities for the arts and culture sector across different party lines, but I think it's worth focusing specifically on our current government, and which may remain our current government if the polling is to be believed, and sort of their top line priorities right now and potentially after an election if they win. So as mentioned by Sean, there was a very big cabinet shuffle when Mark Carney became Prime Minister this last Friday, I think it was. Gosh, time moves. As mentioned, this cabinet was a lot smaller, a lot leaner. They tried to really make sure that everything was targeted around tariffs and everything was very efficient in who was being appointed and what exactly the portfolios that they were being given. So Minister Stephen Guilbeault, a previous Minister of Canadian Heritage, is back, but with a new name to his portfolio. It's the Minister of Canadian Culture, Identity, Parks Canada, and he's also the Quebec Lieutenant. So that means he's in charge of recruiting folks in Quebec and also just speaking to Quebec issues around the cabinet table. This is noteworthy because underneath that umbrella that is already quite big, there are many other portfolios that have been looped in under that. So there is women and gender equality, there's diversity, there's official languages. There's a lot of things that now fall under him. And this is just a testament to sort of the wartime cabinet you can kind of see with Mark Carney right now, where he's really trying to make as many efficient choices and really slim down the size of his cabinet to prioritize the Canada-US, the threat of the United States at this moment. As mentioned, this probably Minister Guilbeault will probably have a priority that's mostly focused on protecting Canadian culture and that cultural sovereignty piece in the face of the United States. It's very likely that issues surrounding the cultural exemption and cultural sovereignty might come up during the election, and they're probably going to lean quite heavily into those Canadian pieces that define Canada, that bring Canadians together, that build unity. So that's probably going to mean really standing firm and protecting CBC Radio-Canada, promoting the modernization that was supposed to be introduced under the previous Minister of Canadian Heritage, Pascal Saint-Onge, and they're probably going to try and place this, and they already have been, placing the CBC Radio-Canada modernization as an election wedge issue. As mentioned, the previous Minister of Canadian Heritage had top-line priorities, specifically on Canada Council for the Arts and funding for the council. Again, whether or not we will see that in a post-election period, whether or not the Liberals win, how that'll look in a potential budget, very TBD at this moment. But those were the priorities that we know went in, along with updating the Copyright Act and then modernizing CBC Radio-Canada. Also worth noting that there's been, well, not exactly new leadership at the Canada Council since it's been, what, a year and a half, 2 years now, since Michelle Chawla has become director and CEO. She's really, during her time there, focused on resetting the tone, making sure that people really have a clear access and a lot more transparency in dealing with council. She spent almost her entire year traveling across the country, speaking with folks in the sector, attending town halls, setting up meetings. She's been very, very accessible during her time. And that shift has been very noticeable. She's also called very publicly in multiple letters to the sector to shift how we talk about arts in Canada, really talk about our impact, the economic impact specifically, but also just more specifically, now that we're looking at a tariff situation, the unity that the sector can bring. Her most recent letter that came out last week really focused in on how she's very concerned about the impacts of the tariffs, but also how it's important that everyone in the sector continues to talk about how the arts are important in this moment, particularly when it comes to building our unity, building cultural sovereignty, whether that's with our community, whether that's with decision makers, whether that's with our board members, whether that's with our audiences. Really talking about that success story is something that she's pushed forward. And this is evident in the priorities that the Canada Council has. These are priorities that were already in the strategic plan that the Canada Council has. I think 2021 to 2026 is their current strategic plan, but they re-released sort of these top line priorities that are guiding them in everything that they do for the path forward for the next little bit here. And number one is really talking about that impact that the arts have, that economic impact, that social impact that the arts have across Canada. And then also making sure that the sector is able to be very resilient in the face of changes, because there's been a lot of changes in the past couple of years, and building the capacity for the sector is something that's really important to her. Making sure that the arts are really deeply connected to Canadians, making sure that all regions across the country have a touch point to the council, that everyone across the country feels that they are represented in some capacity. And then, yeah, just improving how the council engages and supports with the sector, making sure that people have a bit more of a tangible or a reliable way to get in contact with the council. They've started listing publicly all the emails for the people who are reviewing grants, etc. So they've really leaned into that transparency element. I know Andrew's already mentioned that 140 Canada Council ask, and as part of that ask, they've really focused quite heavily on ensuring that there's stability with that ask. So focusing on core grant recipients is a core part of that 140 million ask, as well as addressing some of the regional inequities that have existed through funding, public funding at the Canada Council, which many across the country have raised over the past number of years, and that Michelle Chella has become very sensitive to, and has been very receptive to over the past little while. And then finally, of course, building those business models and financial resiliency. I think the pandemic really highlighted ways in which everyone in the sector can sort of improve how they operate and make those changes to ensure that they can better adapt to changing circumstances. And with that, I will hand it off to Sean.
So I thought we'd spend a little bit of time discussing conservative priorities and messaging. As Andrew and Sonja both indicated, I mean, the polling numbers are looking very different today than they were 6 weeks ago. We were on track for an overwhelming conservative majority win. But again, I think it's important to highlight, whereas the Liberal engagement with the Liberal government is a known quantity, and I will quantify that by saying that a Mark Carney government will not be the same as a Justin Trudeau government. By the same token, we hear a lot of people in the sector that said, well, you know, I've dealt with a Stephen Harper government. Poilievre government's going to be much the same. And I think there's going to be some distinct differences that I want to walk through in terms of how they may differ from their previous conservative governments that we've had in this country. First and foremost, we mentioned the change of the landscape, that this has really moved towards wrapping themselves in the flag. Big rally that took place on Flag Day here in middle of February in Ottawa, unveiling by Pierre Poilievre of the Canada First agenda. Again, refocusing things that are more in scope with that Canada-US relation, whether that be internal trade. We don't need to rely on the United States because we can increase the trade interprovincially, building the stronger borders. The fentanyl crackdown, which, if we remember, is the entire impetus around Donald Trump wanting to impose tariffs, and doubling down on defense. Again, a little bit more of an American-driven, let's get to that 2% overall GDP towards NATO. This is, again, showing the tone of a government that is willing to disrupt. And again, going after sort of the elites and the establishment, the whole Canada is broken theme, existing norms and standards, the expectation around the pace of change, less about getting it right, but getting it done quickly. And as Andrew alluded to, and I think, you know, with that focus on defense and security, it will open the door to probably more cost-cutting efforts government-wide if it does become one of a Pierre Poilievre blue stripe. They haven't abandoned, however, their core principles. And if you have heard Pierre Poilievre or any of his conservative MPs or candidates stand up in the House of Commons or out at a rally in the last 2 years, this is seared in your brain: axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, stop the crime. The landscape may have shifted. You're still hearing those things. And again, what does that tangibly mean? It's the conservative viewpoint that you have to stand up for the forgotten people. Do what you say you're going to do more with less. Never miss the opportunity to target elites. And again, that is sort of a touch point. If we go back to 2008 and the Conservative campaign under Stephen Harper, where he talked about elites and galas, and it proceeded to cost him quite a bit of support in Quebec and in other areas of the country. In many ways, the arts and culture sector is seen as an elite sector. So again, there is going to be a little bit of a nuance on how we work around that. Again, the new focus on putting Canada first. And it's kind of an odd one. How will it play in the Fenelon Falls Tim Hortons? For those that know the Conservative Party, Jenny Byrne, the National Campaign Director, is from Fenelon Falls in Northern Ontario. And again, there is that focus on, I don't care how it ends up being heard anywhere else but by Jim and Jane, who are getting their double-double and their donuts at Tim Hortons. How does it impact them? And are they going to care about whatever it is you're asking? So tangibly, what does this mean? And again, we've done a number of meetings with not only the leader's office, but shadow cabinet critics, a number of individual MPs. And the four words that I hear most coming out of the mouth is, we have no money. It informs every conversation. So again, assume that your proposals will only work if it addresses that problem. As Andrew has mentioned, they have the one-for-one principle that I'll go into a little bit deeper detail in the next slide as to what that means. Again, data. The facts over the feelings are going to be important for any case for change. Articulate clear options in those that are previously unthinkable. This is a party that is willing to change things, defund the CBC, get rid of C11 and Broadcasting Act reform. It's that second part of the conversation. I'll go back to if any of you are West Wing fans, President Bartlett always said, what are the next 10 words? And again, this is where we have to help as a sector reframe, okay, you're going to do this, and here's the impact of this. Here's where we need to go next. That also goes into the next point. Play to the bias towards disruption and build it into the positioning. Again, there are various ways. If the apple cart is going to get overturned, have ways that you can help them reframe it that cause the least impact on the sector in a negative way. And again, going back to that, bureaucracy will struggle to keep up, leading to its marginalization. As Andrew said, they're going to want to go quick. And again, they in many ways see the bureaucracy as gatekeepers. So there may be situations where the bureaucrats are strong friends when dealing with a Liberal government. They may not be as strong an ally and have the same impact in helping move initiatives through at the ministerial level with a Conservative government. And then the top line again, what does success look like with the Conservatives? This is one of these rules that was in place under Harper, but it is really something that Pierre Poilievre has mentioned at almost every rally, the one-for-one rule. For every new dollar spent, a dollar must be cut. So again, when you're thinking of that and saying like, we have a program, we'd like to see more money put into CAPAF. We'd like to have more money put into CADAF. Whatever that amount is, you're going to have to come to the same table and say, okay, if we want $5 million for A, here's the $5 million we're going to take out of B in order to accommodate that. That's what they're looking for to be a part of that conversation. In the Harper days, we did see reductions. So many of them were put back over the course of his mandate, but again, they came early on in the mandate and had to be managed moving forward. Have those conversations now. If you have an opportunity to engage with Conservatives, don't wait until they're in power. If you've got a specific ask, make sure that is being conveyed to them now. The easiest way to make sure that a sector is not heard is to never hear from them. And I think that's the challenge with the arts and culture sector. We engage very regularly with the Liberals, not as much with the Conservatives because they're not seen as natural allies. Have those conversations early and often and set your metrics for what success will look like. And again, this is not only for Conservative goals, but it's for all government goals. You know, it's those built-in relationships that the cultural sector really has an opportunity to influence logic and planning of the next government. You know, we're not going to get a yes to every ask, But again, if we never put the ask forward, we'll never have the opportunity to get a yes. So I think it's an important framing that even though you're not aligned on many issues, you always have to have the opportunity to have the conversation.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean. So Sean's just outlined the importance rather of speaking now and speaking with government officials or decision makers or potential decision makers. But how exactly do you do that? What are the steps or the elements that are needed in order to start that conversation? So I'm going to go through a couple of those pieces, as well as some tools that might be helpful for you in your advocacy. So first of all, there's no one sort of set narrative, set formula that you need in order to have success in advocacy, but there are certain preconditions for success. There are certain elements that every version of success that we have seen, whether it's inclusion of funding in the budget or whether it's passage of a bill, there's always certain elements that are the same between those successes. These include a defined and urgent ask. Government is not going to do something unless it's very clear what it is they're supposed to do. You can't ask them to come up with a solution. You have to come to them with a very specific ask. And then also make it urgent. Why does this need to happen now? Why not a previous government? Why can't it wait until the next funding cycle? Why can't it wait until the next budget? Then also having a rhetoric that matches the priorities of decision makers, whether it's conservatives or liberals. How does this match with the moment? If we're talking with liberals right now and we're pushing for the Canada Council ask of 140 million, why is this ask important right now, especially in the face of a tariff situation? How is this going to help the sector build Canadian unity and cultural sovereignty in the face of an aggressive neighbor to our south? And then also having, this isn't a required element, but is sometimes helpful, having some data to support that impact, especially with conservatives. They're going to want to know the return on investment. And Mark Carney, as an economist, will likely feel the same way, or at least we assume so. We don't know for certain, but they will likely want to see that impact of investment from this ask. And then having a political champion. That can be an individual minister around the cabinet table. It can be a collection of regional MPs from a regional caucus. It can be a collection of different folks in the bureaucracy with a minister. It can be a particular person within the Prime Minister's office, like finding those people who might be your champions. It could be a senator because they're sticking around. They're not going through an election. So a lot of different options for a political champion. And then building a chorus of voices, momentum. This is where you can really sort of leverage the strength of the sector. There are a lot of commonalities and things that the sector is looking for, and you can find individuals across your discipline, across your NASOs and ASOs. You can find a lot of overlap in people who will support your ask, sign on to a letter, sign on to a pre-budget submission, come take meetings with you, talk to their local MP at the same time that you're talking to your local MP to sort of reinforce that ask. And then finally, timing. An opportunity for action is necessary. We can ask right now for 140 million for the Canada Council for the Arts, but there isn't currently an opportunity for a budget to pass right now as we're about to head into an election. So being able to acknowledge when that time is, or when there is a moment to act during the political cycle. An example of this, this is something that we participate in, was the Prairies Arts Coalition, where 17 performing arts organizations got together. They had a defined and urgent ask, 45 million to Prairies Can over 3 years. They had a rhetoric that matched the decision makers. There was a lot of talk, especially in the Prairies, about downtown revitalization. They had a political champion. There was a really big, strong push from Prairies MPs. There was a chorus of voices across the sector, and then also Budget 2024 was the time to act, and this resulted in the Prairies Performing Arts Initiative of 20 million over 3 years. How do you start with this? You start just by defining a goal, finding that shared goal across the sector, whether it's the Canada Council increase, whether it's a particular program at Canadian Heritage, infrastructure, etc., and then looking down the list and asking yourself those questions: why should government invest? Who would support this, etc. And finding that right time is the ideal thing. And then lastly, just really quickly going to fly through a couple of tools that might be helpful, and we can send links around afterwards to anybody who might have questions. But a couple of different items are links that will be helpful for you. Number one, make sure you know, of course, who your member of parliament is. Head to our Commons. You can put in your postal code, you can put in your city, and you'll be able to find them. Soon, all the candidates will be listed on elections.ca. There is also, though, some parties who have all their candidates almost all listed. For example, the Conservative have almost all of their candidates listed currently on their website. And this will be helpful in the lead up to the election. And then throughout, you can send emails, you can send briefs to any of these folks. Polling across Canada, as Sean mentioned, and well, we've all been mentioning, things have been shifting very quickly. So it's important during an election period to sort of look in your specific riding how it's shaping up, and if there are certain MPs or certain candidates rather that you should be reaching out to versus the other. If you only have time to send like 1 or 2 emails, who are the 1 or 2 candidates, who are the 1 or 2 parties that you would want to be reaching out to? 338 is a polling aggregator. It'll tell you each individual riding who is polling. This is more so for after the election, but ministerial staff and bureaucrats, there's going to be a lot of restaffing, a lot of new ministerial staff, and a lot of bureaucrats within all the different ministries after an election. Everything on GEDS, which is the sort of Government of Canada listing of everybody within the government, is publicly available. You can look up their information, you can look up their title, you can look up their email, and you can send an email to, say, the policy advisor or the chief of staff in the Office of the Minister of Canadian Heritage, although that's no longer his name, no longer his title, rather. But I would caution to take some of the information on there with a grain of salt. It can sometimes be out of date. So just be prepared. You might have to do a little bit of trial and erroring with this website. And then finally, what does engagement look like both during an election and after an election? During an election, this is speaking with door knockers, including volunteers. Every time something is raised at a door, that volunteer, that candidate will note it down, and it goes into basically an Excel sheet, a tracker, and that candidate knows that that issue has been raised by multiple different people in his or her riding, and they will be able to bring that forward either through social media or to Party Central, or just know that that is something that is important to their riding. Attending campaign events, attending local halls, engaging in social media. I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Also encouraging audiences and community partners to get out the vote, and then sending letters and information to your local candidates. After an election, some like top line things that you can do is send a congratulation letter to your local MP and then any relevant ministers. Schedule advocacy meetings in your ridings or even in Ottawa if you happen to be here, and then collaborating with other peers to maximize that advocacy efficiency. And then finally, as always, and this is something that you can do at any point throughout the year, is invite elected MPs to a show or to tour a facility and just start building that relationship for your advocacy goals down the road. And with that is it.
Thank you, Sonja. We have a lot of questions, so I'm just going to have to admit we're not going to get to all of them, but if PA is willing, we can circulate the questions and get some responses when we send out the presentation and the slides. So I'll just go through a couple of them. Carney did reduce the size of his cabinet, in particular lumping together multiple different portfolios. Now the Ministry of Canadian Culture and Identity combined with a whole bunch of other things. This person's asking, should the Liberals get re-elected, what should arts organizations expect as a next move in terms of the cabinet composition and particularly this new iteration of Canadian Heritage?
Bottom line is we don't know 100%. This was again, we've used the terminology, a wartime cabinet that Mark Carney put together. It was the smallest, and Andrew, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, since the 1950s. We've never seen, we haven't seen something this small. It was compact. There are actually 7 different ministries that are amalgamated under the Canadian Culture and Identity portfolio. At the end of the day, if Mark Carney receives a mandate from the Canadian people in May, does his cabinet expand? It might well expand. There may be expansion out into different areas. I think the component that remains will be the Canadian culture identity / Canadian heritage. But I think there is going to be some expansion of roles as we move forward, but maybe realignments in different ways.
I'll just briefly mention the Canadian Heritage term. I think was under Kim Campbell, where that ministry was named as Canadian Heritage. I was reading an article this morning, and the hypothesis was that the name came at the same time-ish that John Major made the Department of British Heritage or something along those lines in the UK. And under Tony Blair, that shifted away from that title to go into sort of a more forward-looking perspective. And perhaps this is the idea now. I don't know whether that's truthful or not. But at the end of the day, I think the Carney government is signaling two things to the art sector. One is more broad than our sector, which is that they're trying to signal a very competent, experienced government that has people in place that have been there before, can speak confidently with our American counterparts about what matters and what doesn't. And two, that the idea behind Canadian Heritage right now, at least for the minister, is to really focus on CBC Radio-Canada. With Canadian culture and identity, it makes it a lot more straightforward to say the Minister of Canadian Culture and Identity is here to talk about why CBC Radio-Canada is really important during an election campaign. That's the working hypothesis that we have. What happens post-election? I'm hesitant to go too far beyond what Sean said, given that this is a new government, even though it's not, if that makes sense.
Yeah. What are our best avenues for getting into party platforms, or are we too late?
It's a little bit too late-ish. I know that the Bloc Québécois was writing their platform literally this week, but it's almost all baked in currently. The Conservatives are probably not going to release a traditional platform in the way that we have come to expect it in the past. If anything, it might be a page with their top line priorities. It's not going to be a fulsome suite of priorities in the same way that we might have expected in the past. And then we do know that the Liberals have already sort of closed the date for submissions to their platform. I think it was a couple of weeks ago. So it's too late on the platform, but that does not mean that you cannot still raise issues, particularly at doors, during debates, during town halls, etc.
Yeah, and Sonja made this point during the spiel. I think it's really important to reiterate. I remember door knocking. Sean, you can speak to this very well as well. Each party has a different system, but they really truly do keep track of what people mention at the doors. It's streamlined, it's simple. It's something as simple as they mentioned funding for the arts. They mentioned CBC Radio-Canada. And the number of times those items, those areas are mentioned, it really does make an impact to where the party goes, whether it's immediately or whether it's down the road, what they know to be Canadians' priorities. So I know we'll talk about Arts Vote in just a moment. It's a really good example of mention the arts when somebody comes and knocks on the door. If you're looking for something tangible to do that. You can also send a letter. That's the other tidbit.
Yeah. Okay. One last question. With regards to engaging the Conservative Party in Ontario, for just won a recent majority and just announced his cabinet today. Is it useful to try and engage federal Conservatives through relationships with MPPs on the ground in Ontario? Okay, major head shaking there.
Doug Ford said this week, he said, Doug Ford was asked, what do you think of Pierre Poilievre? What do you think about Mark Carney? And he said, I don't know either one of them. Which is interesting because it's not as though Pierre Poilievre is a new figure out there. So I would suggest the Conservatives in Ontario are different than the Conservatives are federally. So I would go a different route in.
I will reinforce that. Pierre Poilievre sent message of congratulations to every single Conservative provincial leader that won or lost provincial elections recently, except for Doug Ford. He never sent anything his way congratulating him on his third straight majority government in the province of Ontario. I think that's telling.
Case in point, Doug Ford and Christopher Phelan just took a selfie together yesterday, and it was all over social media. So yeah.
Okay. As I said, we had lots of questions. We will try and address them and circulate them after with the recording. So now I'd like to actually welcome Barbara, who is the National Director of the Independent Media Arts Alliance and is a member of the Steering Committee of the Canadian Arts Coalition. Barbara is going to talk briefly about Arts Vote 2025.
Thanks so much, Aubrey, and hi, everyone. I am all of the things that Aubrey just mentioned and also the co-chair of the Arts Vote Working Group. And that's what I'm here to talk about you today. Thank you to Shannon, who already posted the link to Arts Vote in the chat. So Arts Vote is the Canadian Arts Coalition's campaign to ensure that arts and culture do not fall by the wayside this election. So as part of the campaign, we are working behind the scenes and have been working behind the scenes to make sure that arts and culture are included in party platforms. And we are going to be posting that if and when it comes on the website. And Business and Arts just posted a series of links, and I'll be discussing those. The principal thing that I wanted to talk to you about today is the home election kit, which includes a poster for folks to put in their windows, as well as an information sheet to support engaging with candidates, with canvassers, and to think about if you want to participate in a debate. So if you're in an organization, we encourage you to print a bunch of these out, have them at your center, at your organization, to distribute to your members, to your audiences. If you're an individual, we hope that you'll share it with fellow art supporters. Once the election is launched, we'll also have a social media campaign where we'll promote ways to show your support for the arts and engage with folks that are running on social media. We'll give information about why supporting the arts is important right now with facts and statistics, and also about how to engage the electoral process broadly, as well as in debates. You can look for that information by following us at Arts Coalition CA on Instagram. And lastly, I just want to encourage you all to join the coalition by becoming a member. Again, the link to how to do this is in the chat, and you can email us at info@canadianartscoalition.ca about anything at all, membership, arts vote, how to participate, or if you just like to have a conversation with us. And I'll leave it there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Barbara. Okay, so that's it for today. A big thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you to the folks from PA, Sean Casey, Andrew Walker, and Sonja Tilroe for contributing your insightful responses and a thoughtful analysis of an ever-shifting federal landscape. Many thanks to Power Corporation of Canada, presenting partner of the Business Arts Speaker Series. Thank you also to supporting partner ACG. And speaking of ACG, I just wanted to mention that Business and Arts is currently working with them to recruit for the role on our team of Senior Director of Development and Partnership. So if you want to learn more about that role or about any of Business and Arts programs and events, please head over to businessandarts.org for more information, or you can follow us on social media. Many thanks and have a wonderful day, everyone.